Chapter 7: The Animal Group Soul. This idea of the group soul seems to many students novel and difficult. Perhaps an Oriental simile may help us to understand it more readily. They tell us that the group soul is like the water in a bucket, while if we suppose a tumblerful of water withdrawn from that bucket, we shall have a representation of the soul of the single animal. The water in the glass is for the time quite separate from that in the bucket, and it takes the form of the glass which contains it. Suppose that we put into that glass a certain amount of coloring matter, so that the water in it acquires a distinctive hue of its own. That coloring matter will represent the qualities developed in the temporarily separated soul by the various experiences through which it passes. The death of the animal will be typified by pouring back the water from the glass into the bucket, when the coloring matter will at once spread through the whole of the water, tinting it faintly. In exactly the same way, whatever qualities have been developed during the life of the separated animal will be distributed through the whole group soul after his death. It would be impossible to take again out of the bucket the same glass of water, but every glassful taken out afterwards will necessarily be colored by the matter brought in from that first glass. If it were possible to take out of the bucket exactly the same molecules of water, to reproduce the first glassful exactly, that would be a veritable reincarnation, but since that is not possible, we have instead the reabsorption of the temporary soul into the group soul, a process in which, nevertheless, everything that has been gained by the temporary separation is carefully preserved. Not one glass at a time only, but many glasses simultaneously are filled from each bucket, and each one of them brings back to the group soul its own quota of evolved quality. Thus in time many different qualities are developed within each group soul, and of course manifest themselves as inherent in every animal which is an expression of it. Hence come the definite instincts with which certain creatures are born. The duckling, the moment it is set free from the egg, seeks the water and can swim fearlessly, even though it may have been hatched by a hen which dreads water, and is terribly worried to find her charges rushing to what she supposes to be destruction. But that fragment of a group soul which is functioning through the duckling knows perfectly well from previous experience that the water is its natural element, and the tiny body fearlessly carries out its behests. All the while within each group soul the tendency to further and further subdivision is steadily working. It manifests itself in a phenomenon which, though upon a higher plane, has a curious resemblance to the way in which a cell divides. In the group soul, which may be thought of as vividly animating a great mass of matter on the mental plane, a kind of scarcely perceptible film appears, as we might suppose a sort of barrier gradually to form itself across the bucket. The water at first filters through this barrier to some extent, but nevertheless the glasses of water taken out from one side of that barrier are always returned to the same side, so that by degrees the water on one side becomes differentiated from the water on the other, and then the barrier gradually densities and becomes impenetrable, so that we have eventually two buckets instead of one. This process is constantly repeated, until by the time that we reach the really higher animals a comparatively small number of bodies is attached to each group soul. It is found that the individualization which lifts an entity definitely from the animal kingdom into the human can take place only from certain types of animals. Only among domesticated creatures, and by no means among all classes of even those, does this individualization occur. It must of course be remembered that we are very little more than half through the evolution of this chain of worlds, and it is only at the end of this evolution that the animal kingdom is expected to attain humanity. Naturally, therefore, any animal which is now attaining or even approaching individualization must be very remarkably in advance of the others, and the number of such cases is consequently very small. Still, they do occasionally occur, and they are of extreme interest to us as indicating the manner in which we ourselves came in existence in the remote past. The lunar animal kingdom, out of which we were individualized, was at a somewhat lower level than the animal kingdom of the present day, but the principle adopted seems to have been almost precisely the same.